The merfolk of the sapphire deeps had ruled the ocean for 10,000 years, and they'd grown rather comfortable with the arrangement. Their city sprawled across underwater canyons like luminescent spiderwebs, pulsing with bioluminescent magic that had never known the touch of sunlight. In their coral palaces, nobles draped in kelp silk robes discussed the tedious business of keeping the surface dwellers where they belonged, gasping for air above the waves. Which is why, when Captain Maris Vane and her crew dove into the kraken's graveyard, wearing nothing but determination and strategically placed daggers, the Merfolk patrol mistook them for a particularly ambitious school of dolphins. "Captain Lillian," called the youngest scout, his gills fluttering with confusion. "The surface dwellers appear to be... swimming." Lillian turned from her contemplation of the ancient bone fields below, her silver scales catching the filtered sunlight. "Swimming, you say? How quaint. I suppose they've finally invented breathing enchantments worth a damn." No, Captain. They're just holding their breath." The statement hung in the water like a badly thrown spear. Lillian's perfectly arched eyebrow rose higher than the tide. "Holding their breath. In the graveyard, where the pressure alone should crush their fragile lungs like grape skins." "Yes, Captain. And they appear to be playing some sort of game, with a ball made of compressed kelp." This was the moment when Lillian's worldview, carefully cultivated over 2 centuries of maritime superiority, began to crack like a shell under pressure. Maris Vane had learned to swim before she could walk properly, trained by the breath keepers of the sunken isle. While other children played with wooden swords, she practiced the 17 sacred holds, ancient techniques for trapping air in the body's hidden pockets, for slowing the heart until it barely whispered, for moving through water like thought itself. Now, 40 feet below the surface, she spun past a startled yellowfin and caught the kelp ball one-handed, her crew whooping silently around her. They'd been down for 3 minutes already. Child's play for anyone who'd survived the Breathkeeper trials. She had another 12 minutes before things got interesting. "Positions!" she signed to her crew, the hand signals sharp and clear. Big Tam, her quartermaster, could hold his breath for 23 minutes on a good day, though he claimed the record was 32. He'd also claimed he'd once arm-wrestled a giant squid, so Maris took both assertions with appropriate skepticism. The ball flew between them in practice patterns, while they descended toward the bone fields. This was reconnaissance, disguised as recreation, a very human approach to warfare. Why skulk when you could splash? The Merfolk patrol, meanwhile, was having what could generously be called a strategic reassessment. "Should we attack?" asked the scout, gripping his crystal trident with webbed fingers. Lillian watched the humans execute a complex passing maneuver that would have impressed even the Academy's water dancers. One of them, a woman with muscles like ship rope, had just performed an underwater backflip while blindfolded. "Attack?" Lillian murmured. "They're clearly deranged. Best to observe from a safe distance. Their madness might be contagious." But pride has a way of overruling wisdom, especially when that pride has been marinating in superiority for several millennia. Lillian gave the signal, and her patrol descended like silver rain. The first merman to reach the humans learned an important lesson about surface dwellers. They didn't fight like civilized people. Instead of meeting his trident with a proper parrying technique, the scarred human woman simply grabbed the weapon's shaft, yanked him close, and delivered what could only be described as an underwater headbutt. She then grabbed his head fin and flipped him upside down, stunning him. His sense of orientation was, well, disoriented. Maris watched her bosun, Keela, handle the merman with the efficiency of someone who'd once won a fight with a territorial walrus that wouldn't stop bullying the children on the beach. Around them, the water exploded into chaos. Tridents versus determination. Magic versus the kind of stubborn refusal to die that had seen humanity through ice ages. Big Tam had wrapped his massive arms around 2 mermen at once, bear-hugging them, while they tried to remember if their warrior training covered what to do when the enemy won't let go and is somehow grinning underwater. The magic came next. Shimmering nets of force, whirlpools conjured from stillness, the water itself turning against the intruders. Any reasonable air breather would have fled. Maris's crew was not reasonable. They'd practiced this in the deep pools of the sunken isle, where the breathkeepers taught them the magic was just another current to navigate. Duck, weave, use the whirlpool's momentum to slingshot past your opponent. When a merman tried to bind her with glowing kelp rope, Maris simply held still, until he came close to secure the spell, then broke free with a technique that was part escape artistry, part interpretive dance, and entirely human audacity. She caught his shocked expression, those perfect aquamarine eyes, wide with disbelief, before she booped his nose and swam away. The battle might have continued indefinitely, a stalemate of confusion and waterlogged pride, but the Kraken's graveyard had earned its name for a reason. The beast rose from the bone fields like a nightmare wearing too many arms, each tentacle thicker than a ship's mast, and decorated with scars from battles that predated human memory. Its eye, for it only had one now, the other just a mass of scar tissue, fixed on the wrestling figures above, with the interest of someone who'd noticed snacks had arrived. "Scatter!" Lillian's command cut through the water with magical amplification. "Circle up!" Maris signed simultaneously. The group separated like oil and water, which was ironically appropriate. The merfolk rose toward safer waters with swift, graceful strokes. The humans, because they were humans and therefore constitutionally incapable of running from anything that could be punched, swam toward each other.
"That's a big squid,"
Big Tam signed, master of understatement. "Kraken," Keela corrected, because accuracy mattered when facing legendary sea monsters.
"Big kraken,"
Tam amended. Maris assessed their options. They had another 8 minutes of air, various sharp objects, and the kind of confidence that came from once using a ship's anchor as an improvised grappling hook. The Kraken had size, strength, and presumably centuries of experience eating things that tried to steal from its graveyard. She grinned. Fair fight, then. The Kraken attacked with the patience of a creature that had nowhere else to be. One tentacle swept toward them with deceptive laziness, forcing the crew to scatter and regroup. They moved like a school of fish, if fish carried harpoons and had questionable decision-making skills. Lillian watched from above, her patrol forming a defensive circle. She could leave. This was clearly a surface dweller problem now. The Kraken would eat them, the seas would remain pure, and she could go back to her comfortable assumptions about human inadequacy. Instead, she found herself studying their movements. No panic, no wasted motion. They communicated through touches and gestures, faces calm despite the monster bearing down on them. The scarred one, Keela, she'd heard them sign, was actually using the Kraken's tentacle as a pivot point for some kind of spinning maneuver.
"Captain,"
her second-in-command ventured.
"Should we—"
"Observe," Lillian said curtly. "We're gathering intelligence." The Kraken, meanwhile, was discovering that humans were like shellfish, more trouble to eat than they were worth. Every tentacle that reached for them was met with steel or swift evasion. They'd formed a rotating formation now, each swimmer protecting the other's blind spots while maintaining constant movement. And then the big one, Tam, did something that made even Lillian's gills pause. He swam directly at the Kraken's eye. The beast recoiled, more from surprise than pain. In its considerable experience, prey did not typically charge. Prey fled, or fought desperately. Prey did not swim at your face with the determined expression of someone about to deliver a strongly worded complaint. Tam reached the eye, grabbed what he could of the surrounding flesh, and held on as the Kraken thrashed. The other humans used the distraction to deliver coordinated strikes to sensitive spots. the places where tentacles met body, the soft tissue around old scars. As the humans worked together, they took turns striking the kraken, and when one needed a breath of air, another would take its place while the other would go up for a breath. They weren't trying to kill it, Lillian realized. They were trying to annoy it into leaving. It was working. The kraken, deciding that perhaps the bone field wasn't worth this level of hassle, began to retreat into the deeper darkness. Its tentacles withdrew, with the dignity of someone pretending they hadn't just lost an argument to creatures a fraction of their size. Maris's crew regrouped, signing quick checks to one another. 7 minutes left of air, and they hadn't even reached the treasure yet. But they were grinning. The underwater equivalent involved a lot of bubbles and crinkled eyes. That's when Lillian made a decision that would later require significant explanation to the Deepwater Council. She descended. "Surface dwellers," she called, her voice carrying through water with melodic authority. "You're going to drown if you stay down here much longer." Maris turned, still grinning. She pointed to herself, then gave a thumbs up. "The kraken!" But Maris was already swimming toward the bone fields, her crew following with the confidence of people who just faced down a legend and found it lacking. They dove into the graveyard itself, weaving between massive skeletons, while Lillian followed, curiosity overwhelming protocol. The humans knew where they were going. They'd studied the currents, the bone patterns, the way treasure settled in certain pockets over centuries. Within 2 minutes, they'd located a cache of pearl-encrusted artifacts that would have taken Merfolk excavation teams weeks to uncover. "How?" Lillian found herself asking, as they loaded treasures into net bags with practiced efficiency. Maris paused, caught Lillian's eye, and signed something that needed no translation. "Practice." Then she shrugged. The humans began their ascent, movements still controlled despite the weight they carried. Lillian swam alongside them, questions burning in her gills. They broke the surface together into afternoon sunlight that made Lillian's eyes water. "Breathkeeper training," Maris gasped out between gulps of air, treading water like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Been preparing for this our whole lives." "You're insane," Lillian informed her. "Yeah, probably." Maris's grin was salt and sunshine. "Want to see something really crazy?" Before Lillian could respond, Big Tam had produced the kelp ball from somewhere, and the humans were setting up what appeared to be floating goals made of driftwood. "Kelp netball," Keela explained, noticing Lillian's expression. "Underwater polo, basically. Great for building lung capacity." "You play games. Underwater. For training?" "Well, yeah. If you're not having fun, what's the point?" Lillian stared at these impossible humans who'd just driven off a kraken through sheer stubborn enthusiasm. Her worldview hadn't just cracked. It was developing fault lines. "Wanna play?" Maris asked. We need another forward, and you've got the build for it." It was possibly the most ridiculous invitation Lillian had ever received. She was a captain of the Deepwater Guard, protector of ancient boundaries, heir to 10,000 years of maritime tradition. "What are the rules?" she found herself asking. Maris's laugh was as bright as sea foam. "Rules? We're pirates, Captain. We make 'em up as we go." And that was how the great dissolution of Merfolk supremacy began. Not with a battle or a treaty, but with a game of kelp netball under the afternoon sun, where the only rule that mattered was holding your breath long enough to score. The sunken Revenge hadn't been a ship for 30 years, but Maris's crew had made it home anyway. The old galleon rested on a shelf of coral 40 feet down, her broken masts reaching toward the surface like fingers. Air pockets trapped in her hull provided brief respites, and her cargo hold had become an underwater training ground that would have made the Breathkeepers proud. "Again!" Maris commanded, and Keela dove once more, navigating the obstacle course of ropes and hoops they'd strung through the flooded compartments. They'd been here 3 days, and they already had visitors. Young merfolk, the ones whose scales still showed rainbow patterns, came to watch the humans train. They floated at safe distances, whispering in their liquid language, fascinated by creatures who treated the ocean like a playground rather than a holy temple.
They're back,
Big Tam signed, nodding toward a cluster of adolescent mermen near the broken stern.
Let 'em watch, Maris responded. Maybe they'll learn something.
What the young merfolk learned was that humans were completely unhinged. They watched Tam and Keela engaged in what the humans call underwater wrestling, a sport that seemed to involve a lot of grappling and absolutely no regard for dignity. They saw Maris practice her bubble-blowing techniques, creating air pockets large enough to temporarily blind an opponent or provide a teammate with a quick breath. And they saw the meditation circles, where humans sat on the seafloor in perfect stillness, hearts slowing to impossible rhythms, existing in the space between life and death with the serenity of ancient monks.
How?
One brave youngling finally asked, approaching during a surface break. His name was Coral, and his curiosity outweighed centuries of cultural conditioning.
How what?
Keela asked, wringing water from her hair.
How do you enjoy this? The pressure, the darkness, the constant fear of drowning? It's all death to your kind.
Big Tam laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the water.
Death's everywhere, little fish. On land, we've got storms, wild animals, other humans. At least down here, death's honest about trying to kill you.
Plus, Maris added, executing a lazy backstroke, have you ever tried to have fun on land? It's all dirt and taxes. The ocean's got style. Coral's expression suggested he was recalibrating several fundamental assumptions about surface dwellers. Word of the human encampment spread through the currents. Within a week, Lillian arrived with a full patrol guard, ostensibly to monitor the situation. She told herself she was gathering intelligence. She absolutely wasn't curious about the training methods that had produced fighters capable of making a kraken reconsider its life choices.
Captain Lillian,
Maris called out, surfacing near the Merfolk formation.
Fancy seeing you here. Come for a rematch?
I'm here on official business, Lillian replied stiffly. The council is concerned about your activities.
Our activities?
Maris swam closer, and Lillian tried not to notice the way the sunlight caught the water droplets on her shoulders.
We're just training. Maybe playing a little kelp ball? Pretty sure that's not illegal in anybody's ocean.
You're teaching our young your reckless ways.
Hey, we're not teaching anyone anything. They're just watching. Can't help if we're interesting.
The standoff might have continued, but Keela chose that moment to emerge from the depths, pursued by what appeared to be an extremely agitated moray eel. She was laughing.
Big grabby, this one, she called out,
performing an impressive barrel roll on the left that left the eel confused and irritated.
Anyone want to try eel wrestling? First one to get bit loses.
See? Lillian gestured emphatically. This is exactly what I mean. You're all deranged.
Deranged?
Maris pretended to consider this.
We prefer creatively aquatic.
Before Lillian could respond, a commotion erupted from the deeper waters. Her patrol was scattering, tridents raised, as figures emerged from the twilight depths. Merfolk, but wrong. Their scales were the color of dried blood, their movements too quick, too aggressive. Razor fins, Lillian hissed. Raiders from the deep trenches. Outcasts who'd rejected the civilized way of the kingdoms. They came up sometimes, testing boundaries, taking what they could.
Friend of yours?
Maris asked, already signaling her crew. Hardly. Lillian's magic flared, creating a barrier of compressed water. "Get to the surface. This isn't your fight." Maris actually laughed. "Lady, we just moved in. That makes it our fight." The Razorfins attacked with the coordination of pack hunters. They knew the patrol's formations, how to separate and isolate. What they didn't know was how to handle humans, who treated underwater combat like a particularly violent dance recital. Big Tam caught the first attacker in a bear hug, using the merman's own momentum to spin them both into a coral outcropping. Keela had produced her knives from somewhere, and was demonstrating why knife dancing was both an art form and a combat technique among the Breath Keepers. But it was Maris who changed the game. She took one deep breath at the surface, then dove straight down, past the melee toward the Razorfin leader, a scarred brute whose reputation for cruelty stretched across 3 kingdoms. She had something in her hands. Lillian couldn't quite see. The explosion of bubbles was visible from the surface. Maris had brought something the Merfolk had never considered: underwater fireworks. Chemical compounds that reacted with salt water to create massive clouds of bubbles and blinding flashes. She turned the ocean itself into a weapon of distraction. The Razorfins, evolved for deep water hunting, recoiled from the sensory assault. In their confusion, they didn't notice the humans moving through the bubble clouds like ghosts, striking precisely and retreating before their night-adapted eyes could adjust. "Impossible," Lillian breathed, watching tactics that shouldn't work, absolutely work. The battle turned. Patrol guards who'd been struggling found openings as their opponents flailed in the artificial fog. Young merfolk who'd come to watch suddenly understood that strength wasn't always about magic or ancient bloodlines. Sometimes it was about thinking sideways and being willing to look ridiculous if it meant winning. The Razorfin leader tried to flee. Maris caught him in the bubble cloud, and what happened next was obscured by white foam and fury. When the bubbles cleared, he was unconscious and trussed up in his own weapons belt. "How?" Lillian demanded when they'd secured the raiders. She was breathing hard, gills fluttering with exertion, and something that might have been admiration. "Those were Razorfins. They've been raiding for centuries." "Yeah, well..." Maris squeezed water from her hair, casual as you please. "They've been fighting people who fight fair. We're pirates. Fair's not really in our vocabulary." "Those bubble weapons..." "Not weapons. Party supplies. We use them for celebrations, birthdays, successful raids, Tuesdays." She grinned. "Turns out, if you're creative enough, anything's a weapon." Lillian stared at this impossible human woman who'd just revolutionized underwater combat with party favors. "You really are completely insane." "Thanks. Hey, since we're all here and adrenaline pumped, want to play some kelp ball? Patrol versus pirates?" "That's..." Lillian paused. Her patrol was looking at her, some curious, some scandalized. The young merfolk were practically vibrating with excitement, and Maris was smiling, that infuriating, challenging smile that made Lillian want to prove something. "Fine," she heard herself say, "but we play by official rules." "There are official rules?" Big Tam asked. "Since when?" "Since now," Lillian declared. "If we're doing this, we're doing it properly." And that was how the first interspecies kelp ball league was formed, born from violence and baptized in competitive spirit. They played until sunset, humans and merfolk together, and if the ball occasionally exploded in another cloud of celebratory bubbles, well, that just made it more interesting. Later, as her patrol prepared to leave, Lillian lingered. Maris floated nearby, watching the last rays of sun gild the water. "This changes things," Lillian said quietly. Does it? Maris turned to look at her. We're still just humans playing in your ocean. No. Lillian's voice was certain now. You're proof that we've always been wrong. About humans, about strength, about a lot of things.
Heavy thoughts for post-game.
My people won't accept this easily. The older ones, the nobles. They'll see you as a threat to everything we are.
Maris's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as bright. Good. Things that can't change deserve to be threatened. Before Lillian could respond, Coral swam up, eyes bright with hero worship.
Captain Vane, can you teach us the bubble technique? And the breathing? And...
Kid! Maris laughed, ruffling his flowing hair. Get me some of that bioluminescent ink you folks use, and I'll teach you how to write curse words in bubble letters. Lillian watched her patrol's youngest member practically vibrate with joy, and felt the fault lines in her worldview widen into chasms. Change was coming to the deeps, wearing a human face and armed with nothing but audacity and soap bubbles. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself planning training regimes that incorporated human techniques. After all, if you couldn't beat them, and apparently you couldn't, joining them started to look like wisdom. The Deepwater Council had convened in the abyssal chamber for the first time in a century. Bioluminescent creatures swam lazy circles in the darkness above, casting shifting shadows on the assembled nobility. At the center of it all, Lord Tsunami held court, his scales the deep black of trenches where light had never touched.
They are a contamination, he declared,
his voice carrying the weight of millennia.
These land crawlers splash in our sacred waters like children in a puddle. They teach our young to abandon dignity for games. They must be swept away.
Lillian stood at attention, trying not to fidget as the ancient lord's attention fixed on her.
Captain Lillian, you have observed these humans closely. Tell the council. Are they a threat?
It was a trap, of course. Say yes, and she'd be leading the charge to destroy people who'd become, well, not friends exactly, but something. Say no, and she'd be branded a traitor to her own kind. They're a challenge, she said carefully. They force us to question.
Questions are for philosophers.
Tsunami's tail slammed against the chamber floor.
I asked if they were a threat.
Yes, Lillian admitted, but not in the way you think. The chamber erupted. Nobles who hadn't raised their voices in decades shouted over each other. The word war bubbled up from the chaos like poison. Meanwhile, 40 leagues away, Maris Vane was teaching a mixed class of humans and young merfolk how to use kelp as an improvised breathing apparatus.
See, if you blow into it just right,
she demonstrated, creating a small air pocket in the hollow stem.
Emergency breath. Saved my life once when Big Tam sat on my air hose.
That was one time!
Tam protested from somewhere. He was arm wrestling 3 mermen simultaneously. He was losing, but only because they'd figured out how to work together.
Captain!
Keela burst from the water, her face grim.
Scout's back.
It's not good. The scout was Finn, their youngest crew member. Barely 16, but able to hold his breath for 18 minutes and swim like he was half dolphin himself. He'd gone to monitor the council meeting, hidden in the ventilation circuits.
Full war fleet,
he gasped out. 100 ships, maybe more.
Krakens, battle whales, the works. Lord Tsunami's leading them himself.
The young merfolk who'd been training with them went pale, their scales dulling with fear.
The tidebringer fleet? But they haven't sailed in
centuries, Maris finished. Yeah, we have that effect on people. How long? Tomorrow. Dawn.
Silence fell over the assembled group. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then Coral, brave little Coral, who'd been first to approach them, spoke up.
I'll warn the others, the ones who have been training with you. We won't all stand by and watch.
Kid, no, Maris started, but Coral was already diving, moving with the speed of youth and purpose. More young merfolk followed. Not all. Some were too frightened, too bound by tradition. But enough. Enough to matter.
Well,
Big Tam cracked his knuckles.
guess we better prep for a party.
A party? Keela stared at him. Tam, there's 100 ships coming to kill us.
Right. Big party. Better break out the good stuff.
Maris found herself laughing, despite everything.
He's right. If we're going down, we're going down swinging. And if we're going up against tradition itself, she grinned, we better really, really be annoying about it.
They had one night to prepare for a battle that should have been impossible. But then, they'd been doing impossible things since they first dove into the Kraken's graveyard. Time to prove that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't steel or strength. It was the stubborn refusal to do things the way they'd always been done. Dawn came like a threat, painting the horizon in shades of blood and gold. The tidebringer fleet rose from the depths with terrible majesty. Ships of living coral and calcified bone, pulled by creatures from the deep places where pressure crushed everything but ancient grudges. Lord Tsunami rode at the forefront, on a war whale the size of a cathedral, his trident crackling with bioluminescent lightning. Behind him, the greatest army the ocean had seen in an age, come to wash away the human stain. They found the pirates waiting. Not fleeing, not hiding. Waiting. Maris stood on a floating platform of lashed-together barrels. Her crew spread out in the water around her. They'd painted themselves in with bioluminescent ink, Coral's parting gift, turning their bodies into living war banners. Behind them, impossibly, stood a ragged line of young merfolk. Not many, maybe 30, but they were there, scales bright with defiance.
Last chance, Tsunami!
Maris called out, her voice carrying across the water.
Turn around! Go home! Find a hobby that doesn't involve genocide.
The ancient lord's response was to raise his trident. The sea itself responded, walls of water rising like liquid mountains.
Now!
Maris dove. The battle that followed would be remembered in sea songs for generations, though no two versions would agree on the details. How could they? How could anyone explain humans turning the ocean's fury into a game? They rode the tsunami walls like surfers, whooping with insane joy as destruction chased their heels. When war whales charged, they played underwater bullfighter, spinning aside at the last second and leaving the creatures confused and tangled in their own harnesses. The bubble bombs came next. Not just party favors this time, but Keela's special mixture. Chemicals that reacted with seawater to create massive, sticky foam that clung to everything. Elite merfolk warriors, trained for centuries in graceful combat, suddenly found themselves looking like rabid bath toys.
Formation Gamma!
Maris's crew heard the hand signals and scattered, just as a kraken's tentacles swept through where they'd been. They regrouped instantly, each human paired with a young merfolk rebel. This is what they'd trained for in secret, not just to fight, but to fight together. Humans providing distraction and chaos, merfolk adding magic and speed. It shouldn't have worked. The cultural gap was too wide, the anatomical differences too vast. But somewhere between the kelp ball games and shared laughter, they'd found a rhythm. Lillian arrived with her patrol just as Big Tam was attempting to suplex a battle shark. She'd come to stop the slaughter, Though which side she'd planned to stop was a question she hadn't answered until she saw Coral, little bright-scaled Coral, fighting back to back with the scarred human woman. "Tidebringer!" she roared, magic amplifying her voice. "You've gone too far!" Lord Tsunami turned his ancient gaze on her.
You defend the contamination? You're no daughter of the deeps.
"Maybe not," Lillian admitted, raising her own trident. "But I'm done with the old ways, if they mean killing children for the crime of learning." The defection of a patrol captain, that changed things. More merfolk hesitated, seeing one of their own stand with the humans. The battle lines, so clear moments before, began to blur like ink in water. But Tsunami had ruled too long to bend. He called upon the deep magics, the ones that slept in trenches and dreamed of the time before light. The water turned black as night, pressure increasing until even the merfolk struggled. This was how it would end then. Not in glorious battle, but in crushing darkness. The ocean itself turned against all who defied its master. Except... "Hey, Tsunami!" Maris's voice, impossibly cheerful, echoed from somewhere in the blackness. "Want to see something really stupid?" Light exploded through the water. Not magic. Chemistry. The humans had brought flares, sealed in waterproof containers, saved for this exact moment. The crushing darkness retreated, revealing the impossible. Every human and rebel merfolk had linked hands, forming a massive circle, with Lord Tsunami at its center. They were grinning, all of them. Even as the pressure tried to crush them, they were grinning like lunatics. "Ring around the tyrant," Maris sang, and the others picked up the children's rhyme. "Pocket full of bubbles." They began to swim, in unison, creating a whirlpool with nothing but determination and synchronized movement. It was ridiculous. It was childish. It was working. Tsunami, for all his power, was still subject to physics. The whirlpool caught him, spun him, turned his own magic into chaos. His carefully maintained dignity disappeared as he tumbled like laundry in a wash basin. "Ashes, ashes," the singers continued, their circle tightening, the spin increasing. "We all fall down!" They broke formation simultaneously, scattering as the whirlpool collapsed. Tsunami, dizzy and disoriented, found himself facing something he'd never encountered in 10,000 years of life. Beings who refused to take him seriously. "You dare," he started, trying to regain his bearing. "Yeah, we dare," Maris interrupted, treading water casually. "We dare to have fun. We dare to make friends. We dare to think that maybe, just maybe, the ocean's big enough for all of us."
"The old ways
"Are old," Lillian finished, swimming to stand, float, beside Maris. "Maybe it's time for new ways." The fleet wavered. Without their lord's certainty, centuries of tradition suddenly seemed less solid. Young voices among the warriors began to speak up, those who'd heard stories of the humans' games, who'd secretly wondered what it would be like to play. That's when the real miracle happened. Coral started it, of course he did. He pulled out a kelp ball. Where had he even been keeping it? And tossed it to the nearest human. "Game on?" he suggested hopefully. The human caught it, grinned, and passed it to a confused warrior, who passed it to another, who passed it to Big Tam, who whooped and dove. Within minutes, the greatest naval battle in Merfolk history had become the largest kelp ball game ever played. Even some of Tsunami's warriors joined in, curiosity overwhelming conditioning. Lord Tsunami watched his war dissolve into play. His ancient face cycled through emotions that hadn't touched it in millennia. Rage, confusion, and finally, something that might have been wonder.
"This is impossible," he said quietly.
Nah. Maris swam over to him, casual as could be. "This is human. We're really good at impossible. Want to join? You look like you've got a wicked throwing arm." The moment stretched like taffy. The Lord of the Deeps, faced with a choice between centuries of tradition and a simple game. He took the ball. His throw was magnificent. Centuries of swimming had given him incredible strength. It soared over the players, and Big Tam had to breach completely out of the water to catch it. A cheer went up, not just from the humans, but from merfolk across the spectrum. Because if Lord Tsunami could play, anyone could. The war was over. It ended not with death, but with laughter. Not with conquest, but with connection. And if the history scrolls would struggle to explain how a children's game defeated the tidebringer fleet, well, that just meant the historians needed better imaginations. Just months later, the first Deepwater Games were held at the intersection of surface and sea. Humans and merfolk competed in events that ranged from traditional swimming to synchronized bubble blowing to extreme kelp ball. Maris and Lillian provided commentary from a floating platform, their partnership having evolved from mutual antagonism to something neither quite had the words for yet.
"And there goes Big Tam with the shark wrestle. Oh, that's gotta hurt."
Indeed. Though, I notice the shark seems to be enjoying himself. I believe that's a smile.
"Everything's better when you're having fun," Maris said, then caught Lillian's eye. "Even impossible things."
"Especially impossible things," Lillian agreed. Below them, Lord Tsunami was teaching a group of human children how to speak to dolphins. He'd become oddly protective of the games, threatening to unleash the depths on anyone who suggested they were undignified.
"Change is good," he'd declared at the opening ceremony. "Stagnation is death. And games are life."
Coral had become the first ambassador between the species, splitting his time between teaching humans advanced swimming techniques and learning human games to bring back to the depths. His favorite was something called Marco Polo, which the merfolk had adopted with enthusiasm and a disturbing level of tactical planning. "You know," Lillian mused, watching a human and merman work together to launch a spectacular aerial maneuver. "Your people really did conquer the seas." "Did we?" Maris asked. "Feels more like we just made friends." "Same thing, perhaps. You conquered our fear, our isolation, our certainty that we were better alone." "We're pirates," Maris laughed. "We steal things. Guess we stole your hearts." Lillian groaned at the terrible line, but she was smiling. Below them, the games continued, a celebration of differences, a testament to the power of play, and proof that, sometimes, the best way to win a war was to refuse to fight it. The seas belonged to everyone now, and they were all the richer for it. In the depths, krakens learned to play catch. On the surface, humans perfected the art of underwater basket weaving. And somewhere between the sunlight and the abyss, two peoples became one, united by the revolutionary idea that the ocean was more fun when you shared it. The merfolk had ruled the seas for 10,000 years. The humans had made them worth ruling. And together they made waves. Years later, Captain Maris Vane stood at the prow of her new ship, a hybrid of human engineering and merfolk magic that could sail both above and below the waves. Her crew was equally mixed these days, though you could hardly tell underwater. Everyone moved like dolphins now. "Captain!" Coral called from the crow's nest, his voice carrying on the wind. "Kraken off the starboard bow!" "The big-eyed one?" Maris asked.
That's him! Excellent. Someone grab the beach ball, the really big one. It's his birthday!
As her crew scrambled to prepare for what would surely be the most ridiculous birthday party the ocean had ever seen, Maris felt arms wrap around her from behind. "You realize," Lillian said into her ear, "that teaching a kraken to expect birthday parties was perhaps not your wisest decision?"
When have I ever made wise decisions? Maris turned in her wife's arms. Besides, you're the one who figured out his birthday.
I maintain that was academic curiosity.
Sure it was. Face it, you've gone full human. Next thing you know, you'll be suggesting we teach the whales water polo.
Lillian's fins flushed. That's actually not a terrible idea. Maris laughed, bright and free as sea foam.
And that, my love, is why we're perfect for each other.
Behind them, Big Tam emerged from below decks, carrying a beach ball the size of a small building. Keela followed with what appeared to be a cake made entirely of fish. The one-eyed kraken, seeing the festivities beginning, rose from the depths with what could only be described as tentacular enthusiasm.
"Happy birthday, you magnificent calamari!" the crew shouted in unison.
The kraken's delighted roar could be heard for leagues. And in that moment, surrounded by impossibility, powered by audacity, and united by joy, the truth was clear. Humanity hadn't conquered the ocean. They'd made it home. And home, as any human could tell you, was wherever you were brave enough to blow bubbles in the face of tradition and call it a party.